Ladies and gentlemen, I plan to speak to you today about the report of the State of the Union, but the events from earlier today have led me to change those plans. Today is a day of mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all the people of our country. This is truly a national loss. 19 years ago, almost to the day, we lost 3 astronauts in a terrible accident on the ground. But we've never lost an astronaut in flight before. We've never had a tragedy like this. And perhaps we've forgotten the courage it took for the Shuttle Challenger crew. But they, the Challenger 7, were aware of their dangers and overcame them. They did their jobs brilliantly. Today we mourn 7 heroes: Michael Smith, Dick Scobie, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McCullough. We mourn their loss as a nation together. This is a direct quote from Ronald Reagan as he informed the shocked nation of the loss of the Shuttle Challenger and its crew. Let's have a look at the man making this speech, starting with Ronald Reagan's personal life. Mr. Reagan was born in Tampico, Illinois on the 6th of February, 1911, to Jack and Nellie Reagan. They were of Irish and Scottish descent. He had one older brother named Neil. When he was an older young man, he attended Eureka College in Illinois, majoring in economics and sociology. He was a member of the fraternity, captain of the football team, captain of the swim team, even the student president. And in college he began to act, and it kind of made him popular. In 1940, Ronald Reagan married fellow actor Jane Wyman. After the war, World War II, the Reagans were confidential FBI informants, spying on suspected communists. Codenamed T-10, Ronald and his wife Jane provided federal agents with names of actors they believed were communist sympathizers, and even infiltrated different organizations looking for communists. In 1948, Jane and Ronald divorced. In 1952, Ronald Reagan married Nancy Davis, and Mrs. Reagan was with him until he passed away. Ronald Reagan also served in the United States military before and during World War II. In 1937, Ronald Reagan enlisted in the Army Air Corps, commissioned later in the same year. He was a port liaison officer at the Transportation Office in California. And then along came the December 7th, 1941 Pearl Harbor attacks. Lieutenant Reagan was ordered to active duty just 4 months later in April of 1942. However, due to his short-sightedness, he was excluded from overseas duty, and he stayed in the United States, mainly making films for the Army. He was also assigned to the Army Air Force Public Relations, and later to the 1st Motion Picture Unit of the Army. In January 1944, he was again activated, this time to New York to participate in the 6th War Loan Drive. Captain Reagan was separated from active duty in December of 1945. After the war, T-10 went down a much longer career path in the military. After many years of acting, Mr. Reagan went into politics. Mr. Reagan ran for and was governor of California from 1967 until 1975. He emphasized 2 main items. First of all, send those welfare bums back to work. And in reference to the out-of-control riots and anti-establishment student protests at the University of Berkeley in California, he vowed, "Clean up that mess at Berkeley." In 1976, he ran, but lost, for the presidential Republican nomination. Gerald Ford would then lose against Jimmy Carter. In 1980, Ronald Reagan earned the Republican nomination, ran against Jimmy Carter, and became president in a landslide victory. He advocated 4 main things: lower taxes to stimulate the economy, less government interference in people's lives, a strong national defense, and he wanted to restore the dollar to a gold standard. On the 30th of May, 1981, only 69 days into his presidency, John Hinckley Jr. attempted to assassinate President Reagan. Approximately a year and a half later, on the 1st of September 1983, Russian fighters shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007 because it strayed off course into Russian airspace. After that, Ronald Reagan made GPS available to public civil aviation. In 1984, President Reagan was re-elected by landslide, defeating Walter Mondale and Geraldine Ferraro, who, by the way, was the first woman to run as Vice President of the United States. 28th of January 1986, the Shuttle Challenger disaster happened. Later on that year, Ronald Reagan began the nuclear arms reduction with Russia. In 1987, President Reagan made a speech in Berlin. "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And 2 years later, that wall came down. After public service and so many years of public life, President and Mrs. Reagan, they decided to retire. They purchased a second home in Bel Air, Los Angeles, California. However, Mr. Reagan wasn't quite done yet. He continued to campaign for George H.W. Bush. In 1991, the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library opened, with 5 presidents and 6 first ladies in attendance. This was the first time 5 presidents were ever together in one place at the same time. In 1994, at age 83, President Reagan was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. In 2001, he fell and broke a hip and was very slow to recover. The 5th of June, 2004, at age 93, President Ronald Reagan passed away of pneumonia, complicated by Alzheimer's disease, at his home in Bel Air. President George Bush declared the 11th of June, 2004, a national day of mourning, and the state funeral was also that day. George Bush presided, with eulogies from Margaret Thatcher, both Bushes, and the Canadian Prime Minister Mulroney. In attendance, Mikhail Gorbachev, Gerhard Schröder, Silvio Berlusconi, and Hamid Karzai. Today we talked about the Shuttle Challenger disaster and remembered the 7 astronauts lost that day. We talked about the man who made the speech. We looked at the early years of Ronald Reagan, U.S. military officer Ronald Reagan, President Ronald Reagan, and finally the retirement and passing of President Ronald Reagan. I hope this brought you a little bit closer to a true American icon. Thank you for watching.